Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, I want to show you some clips of a recent podcast with Adam Grant, the pop psychology, pop science writer, and he's a professor as well. He appeared on the Modern Wisdom podcast recently and had a lot of interesting things to say about potential and motivation and improvement. And I want to take some of those ideas he's offering and apply them to a specifically educational context, even more specifically to, in some cases, to the English education context. So I want to show you a few clips, and then I'll respond to what he says and try and make things a little more specific for our field here. But Grant is a best-selling author. Here are a couple of his books. I've read at least two of them, I know for sure. The two most recent, I don't think I have yet. But, like many authors today, it's sort of following in the Malcolm Gladwell path of telling a lot of stories and little anecdotes, and everything is very positive, and it's all about success and how can you be more productive and efficient and all of the things that are very popular today. And so the science isn't always super rigorous in places, but there are a lot of good ideas, and I think generally probably overall fairly true. So I do want to apply those, though, to a more specific context. So let's dive in.
I guess the study that really opened my eyes to this was Benjamin Bloom looked at world-class athletes, musicians, scientists, artists, and he went back to their childhoods and wanted to know, were they innately just brilliant at these skills from day one? And the consistent answer was no. That very often their early teachers and coaches, even their own parents, had no idea how great they were going to become. And when they did stand out, it wasn't for natural ability. It was because they were unusually passionate. They loved to learn. And they had early opportunities to get lots of practice in. And I think what that suggests to me is that sometimes we overestimate the importance of raw talent, and we underestimate the importance of creating opportunities that open doors for people and then giving them a chance to actually showcase their enthusiasm.
What about motivation? Where does that come from in this context?
I think in a lot of the cases, if you look at the Bloom study at least, the world-class performers tended to have an early teacher or coach who made learning fun. And I think that's not common for a lot of us, right? Like learning to do scales if you're a musician, doing drills if you're an athlete, it can be a slog. And the idea that this boring task that might just lose your interest or might exhaust you could actually be exciting. It draws you in and it makes you want to keep learning. And over time, that becomes self-reinforcing because after all, it's hard to like something that you just suck at, right? As you gain skill and build up mastery, that's when your motivation begins to really soar.
So this is a common topic that's up for debate constantly in the education environment and even in the parenting environment, which is, how do I get my kids to be really good at stuff? Whether it's something in school, whether it's some sort of extracurricular like music or sports or art or whatever. How do I push them? Do I force them to try things and then make them stick with it so that they eventually become good at it? Do I just let them decide what they like, and then if they want to keep going, they can? We all want our kids to be successful. As teachers, we all want our students to be successful, but how exactly does that happen? Because not every kid is going to be good at everything, and kids certainly don't like everything. So how do you know what direction to push them in? And this is where some of the science is a little fuzzy, because he sort of says two things at the same time here. If you noticed, he says that a lot of the time it's because there's a teacher that pushes you and gives you opportunities and is very positive and encouraging, and that's all true. I mean, you're not going to be great at something probably if you have someone who's just berating you all the time and you hate practicing and it's just a miserable experience. But on the other hand, it does take a certain level of interest in an activity or a school subject to even get on the right track. Or if, maybe a kid doesn't like it, a teacher might be able to turn them around, but, there's usually something that draws students to a certain subject area or other activity. So as both Chris and Adam say at the very end, yeah, it's about enjoying it, sort of, but what's also important is that you have to be pretty good at it. So as they mention, no one's going to like going to work or to practice or to school every day if you stink at that activity. or that subject area, whatever it is. You have to be pretty good at it. So it's sort of a chicken and egg situation. Which comes first, the fun or the success, the talent, the skills? And I think there has to be something else going on in a kid's brain. And we don't know what it is. Some kids are just drawn to things. They like the tedium, and some kids don't. So yeah, along the way, we need teachers to be helpful, but we can't just assume, oh, well, if I'm a really good teacher and if I'm super encouraging and I'm there giving the best guidance, that I can turn any kid into a great math student or a great basketball player or whatever. It's just, there has to be something in the kid who wants to do those kinds of things, who wants to keep improving. And so yeah, it's not quite so easy as just saying, well, we need good teachers. There's a motivation inside a person that is beyond what can be taught. Some people have certain affinities for music or for art or for whatever, and they're drawn to it, and they want to keep getting better at it. I was always a very good reader. I started reading very young for whatever reason. I just liked it. I wanted to know what things said. When my mom started teaching me at age 3, I asked her, why did you start at 3? Were you just trying to push me ahead? And she goes, not really. She said, you just wanted to know what things said all the time. And so she's like, I guess he wants to read, so let's start reading. And that's what we did. I was pretty good at math and numbers when I was a kid. I got worse as I got older because I just didn't care about it as much. But, those were things I kind of liked. I was a good student. I liked learning things for the most part. And even at sports, I liked going out and practicing. I liked having someone throw pass patterns to me and catching it over and over and over and over again. I liked going to the gym and shooting for hours on end, just working on my shot. I liked fielding ground balls for hours and hours and hours. I don't know why I liked it. It just, part of it was I was very good at it very quickly. So that's probably part of it. But again, how do you know if it's the innate interest or the early success or the innate skills? They're all combined. So there isn't really one answer. And while Grant is trying to offer a little bit of, again, pop science to try to explain people's motivations and their levels of success, sometimes it's just in you. You just have it. I was never interested in music. I didn't care at all about learning the piano or guitar or singing or any of that stuff. I was like, nope, that looks too hard. That's going to take years to get good at. And I just don't care. I'd rather be out playing basketball at the park, or I'd rather be sitting and reading, a novel or, a sports magazine or something. Like, I just didn't care. And yet I had new friends and had, new people in my life who were playing music at a very early age and willing to put in the time and the tedious practice to get good at it. Well, that wasn't me. So why was that? My father plays music. He's a very good musician, and yet I didn't care. So it's not even something where it's in the household all the time. My dad did love sports, and so that's part of probably why I took to it. But, you never know what your kids are going to like. So it is useful to have them try a bunch of stuff because, they may not know what they like either until they try it. But, I think I would disagree with him. I think there is something innate, at least a little bit. You're not automatically talented, but there is an innate drive you're drawn to certain things that you just want to kind of be good at. And then the teacher comes along and sees that little spark and says, hey, you could be really good at this. I can help you. And then if they want to do that, they can. So it's a bit of both. That's why Grant's answer there is a little confusing. He says it's not innate, but then he also says, yeah, but you have to be good at it first before you really like it. And that's all true too. So it's a bit confusing. This is why on my Substack here a couple weeks ago, I wrote that article called something about competence. Competence is more important than fun, or something like that. You can go find the title. And that's what I talk about. It's, you kind of need to be good at something before it becomes fun. Things are not fun when you're just starting and when you're not very good. No one wants to practice that much if you're not any good at it. So it's a very weird, again, chicken and egg situation. Like, well, in order to become good, you have to practice, but in order to like practice, you have to be good. So it's the kids who are willing to get on that cycle. Those are the ones who tend to be successful. So you just got to find out what's the path for your kid or your student that makes them actually want to practice.
The good news is that motivation is malleable. And if you don't find it on day one from within, it can actually be sparked or stimulated from the outside. And I think what a great coach or teacher does is they help you find your own motivation. So I've lived this personally. I loved sports when I was a kid. And unfortunately, I wasn't any good at all the ones that I, I became passionate about. And basically the last sport that I thought to try was springboard diving. That summer, my mom dragged me to a local pool, and there was a lifeguard who was an all-state diver. And he was doing flips and twists on his break. And I watched him and I was mesmerized. And I wanted to learn how to do it. But diving did not come naturally to me. I actually was nicknamed by my first coach Frankenstein because I was so stiff that I couldn't touch my toes without bending my knees. And I actually walked like Frankenstein. I go to my first tryout and the coach says, do you want the good news or the bad news? And I say, definitely the bad news. And he tells me that his grandmother and his grandfather can both outjump me, that, I don't have the flexibility or explosive power or grace that you look for in a typical diver. I'm like, is there good news? And he says, yes, diving is a nerd sport. It attracted all the people who were too short for basketball and too slow for track and too weak for football. If you want to be good at this, if you pour yourself into this, then I think by the time you graduate from high school, you're going to be an all-state diver. And that just lit a fire in me, right? The idea that this coach, who had actually trained an Olympian by that point, saw more potential in me than I saw in myself. It made me want to get better. And every time I hit the water and Eric gave me, he'd be like, Adam, that was bad. I'm like, how bad? And he'd say, I'd give that a 3.5. We talk about how can I get a 4 and how can I get a 4.5? And that just made me more and more excited to learn. And I ended up making the state finals, not my senior year, but my junior year. And by that point, when I graduated from high school, I couldn't believe it. I was a two-time Junior Olympic national qualifier, and I made the All-American list. And I was being recruited to dive at the NCAA Division I level, which I had no business doing. But none of it would have ever happened if Eric Best didn't look at me and say, "Adam, you're not any good today, but I believe you can be much better tomorrow."
It's fascinating. The idea of somebody who believes that your potential is greater than you do. It's such a beautiful idea to have for a friend, for a partner, for a coach.
Okay, so this is another example that sounds good. This is the anecdote is very effective, but it's not telling the full story, or it's sort of hinting at it, but it's not clarifying what's actually going on here. So, he says, well, it's this coach who believed in me, and that's what made me want to, try and improve and be great. Yeah, kind of. But there's something else that had to happen first. Why was he so interested in diving? There had to be something that drew him in. What fascinated him about seeing that guy at the local pool who was a good diver and made him want to try that sport? There was something in him that had to click. For me, I was always a very good swimmer. I had no interest in diving. I had a friend who was a really good high school diver, and the thought of going up that high and spinning and flipping and potentially like slamming my stomach or back on the water, I wanted no part of that. I don't like heights. I don't like spinning around. I don't like roller coasters. I don't like any of that kind of stuff. So, and yet I love the water. I love swimming. I love being active in the water. I have no interest in diving. Why? It's just, there's something in you. So why did he get drawn to that guy diving? And even though, as his coach said, yeah, you're actually not very good at this. Well, that kind of betrays the competence part before, where, you kind of have to be pretty good in order to want to keep practicing. So now he's saying, well, I was really bad, but this coach believed in me, and that's what made me want to keep practicing. It's like, well, you're kind of having it both ways. So again, there's the other factor, which is there's something inside kids, students, even adults, where you're just intrigued by it. You want to try it. And even if you're not very good, you're like, I think this was kind of fun, but I wasn't any good, but I want to keep doing it. Why is that? Who knows? But again, it's not so easy as just saying, well, a good coach, if they're just positive with you and say, you can be great, that you'll automatically become an all-state diver and a Division I, college athlete. That's just not how it is. There has to be something that draws the kid in. So our job as parents and teachers is to find the thing that draws them in. Sports is easy because you're already there. You've tried out. It's not like you have to find out what you like. You've already shown up for the tryout. You clearly want to be a part of it. School is a little different. You have to be there. There's 10 different subjects, and you're trying to find what you like. But it's more innate than we think. There's something in each of us that you just kind of like stuff for whatever reason, and everyone's different. And yeah, sometimes it's a coach that turns you on to a new skill or a new activity. But again, there had to be some little spark in the kid first. So again, our job as parents and teachers is to, what do the kids like? What are they interested in? What do they want to keep getting better at, even though they stink at it at first? What makes them want to keep practicing? And then that's when we encourage them, which is what this coach did. And the idea of potential and you could be better than you even think. It reminds me of an old story from the Hall of Fame football coach Bill Parcells of the New York Giants, and his quarterback Phil Simms had a really good game, and he came off the field, and Parcells was a very tough coach and yelled a lot and was just very demanding. And Phil Simms came off and said, "Coach, didn't I play great? I had all these touchdown passes and all these yards, and are you excited that the team won and I played really well? And can't you see I'm getting really good at being an NFL quarterback?" And Parcells said, "I'm disappointed that my expectations for you are higher than the ones you have for yourself." And so Phil Simms was like, "Whoa, I was happy with winning that game and throwing a couple touchdown passes, and I played really well. So my expectations were here. My coach sees something in me that he knows I could be actually up here." And Simms says that's what pushed him to keep getting better. And a couple years later, they won the Super Bowl. And so, that idea of seeing something in a student is a real thing that, I believe you can do better than even you think you can. That's definitely true. Happened for Grant, happened for Phil Simms, the New York Giants. It happens for a lot of people. So we do need good teachers, good coaches who see that little something in the kids who want to learn, who want to practice, who want to try to improve. And yeah, keep pushing them and keep saying, "You know what? I think you could do better. Yeah, this is pretty good. I can see you're improving. You can go even further. Let's get even higher." That is what kids need. And he's going to talk more about how we push students and or other people, and where the role of praise and criticism coming up. So let's keep going.
Like, I'm not living up to my potential. And what they forget is that potential is not fixed, right? Yeah, you have a floor that's determined by your current level of skill, and you have a ceiling, but that ceiling is not set in stone. It's dependent on changes in your skill and shifts in your motivation and the opportunities that are put in front of you. And I think what's striking to me is that what I lived as a diver is true for all of us. We all have hidden potential, which is a capacity for growth that might be invisible to you. And it might also be invisible to some of the people around you. And you just haven't recognized it yet. And I think that so many of us, we confront people who are critics, who basically attack the worst version of ourselves, or cheerleaders who applaud the best version of ourselves. And what we want are those coaches who see our hidden potential and help us become a better version of ourselves. And so I think the question is less, am I living up to my potential? And more, what is my hidden potential and how do I realize it?
So there's several things here. And again, these things are a bit fuzzy because the science is not clear on this. But when he talks about hidden potential, it's like, well, that depends. What are you meaning exactly by potential? I always tell my students in class that there was no potential for me to be like LeBron James. There wasn't. My parents are 5'7" and 5'5". It's a miracle I got to be 6'1". LeBron James is 6'8", 250 pounds of muscle. He has in him the genetic potential to be that. And so that's what he was. I didn't have any of that genetic potential. So when we say, well, potential isn't fixed, it can grow and you can be more than you thought. It's like, well, yes, but there is a ceiling to that too. There are certain things you absolutely cannot become, mostly determined due to your genetics. Could be determined by your opportunities. If you live somewhere where there aren't certain opportunities for being part of a team or accessing resources or going to certain types of schools, you literally can't be a part of those things. Whereas if you grow up in the next state over where they have all these opportunities, well, yeah, that person's potential is going to be bigger because there's more influences on that person himself or herself. So his idea of hidden potential, again, it's very pop science. It's very positive. Everyone can be great. You just got to unlock your hidden, the secrets within you. And I was like, no. Okay. Partly yes, but you also have limits. Our job as individual people, and then as the teachers and coaches who work with those individual people, is to find our own ceiling, like what's as far as I can go. And then the coaches and teachers need to come along and push students or their athletes or their whatever to that highest potential. There isn't an unlimited amount of potential. There isn't a continuing expansion of what you can be and do. You will reach a ceiling. It's nature. Now, how far you get, how close you get to that, yeah, that is up to you, and that's the coaching and the help that you get. But again, he's being overly positive about, if you just keep working, you can do anything kind of idea. It's like, no, that's not real. While I was pretty good at math when I was a kid, I don't believe I could have become a math and physics, MIT level student. It's just, I don't think that's true. I just don't think it's wired within me. Again, I think I was pretty good. I probably could have gone further if I had worked harder. Again, after a while, I just stopped caring about it. And so, in high school, I stopped at trig. I never even took calculus because I was like, I don't like it. I don't think I'm great at it. So I'll move on to other things. And, so could I have gone further? Maybe. I don't know. Could I have been an athlete in other sports? I don't know. Maybe. But again, there is certain ceilings that you will reach. And part of our job as teachers is to help kids get to that ceiling. And if they can't go any further, that's fine. You've done the best you can do. And that's all you can ask of anybody. But we have to be careful of saying, you have the potential to do anything. It's like, well, no, you don't. As good, I was a good swimmer when I was a kid. I've never had the potential to be Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps's body is engineered for swimming. He's the perfect swimmer. So like everyone has a limit. And again, that could be same thing in music. I have a pretty good ear and I've learned to play instruments as I got older, but there's no chance I would ever be a concert level pianist. There's just no way. I don't have the ear. I don't have the coordination in my hands. I don't have the knowledge of music theory. Like I would reach my limit way below that. So, again, helping kids figure out what could you do where you reach your maximum potential. And that's great. Just do that. But the idea of, well, there's a hidden potential in everybody. Well, sort of. There's another side to that story.
I'm thinking about some research that Ayelet Fishbach did, where she finds that novices are more drawn to and motivated by praise because they need to believe that they're capable of getting better. Otherwise, it's just too discouraging to be bad at something. But that experts are more interested in criticism. Like, okay, I don't need somebody to convince me that I can be good. I just want to know how I can get better. And so I think that, that is a mark of being somebody who's truly driven to master a craft. I think where maybe you get yourself in trouble from what I'm hearing is you're not filtering out. Remember, well, let me back up a step and say, not all critics are actually thinking critically, and not all critics are speaking constructively. So there needs to be a finely tuned filter around, you said, does this person have my best interest at heart? Endorse. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I also want to ask, does this person have credible knowledge about the domain you're trying to improve in? And do they have credible knowledge about you? Because somebody who doesn't know your world or doesn't know your potential is not a good judge of what you need to work on.
The idea of criticism, though, is important, where he said, novices want praise and experts want criticism. I would be even more tough than that, because it's not about what they want, okay? It's about what's best for them. And yeah, all kids want praise because it feels nice for the teacher or the parent to say, oh, you're so good. That's a great job. Here's a sticker. Here's an A, whatever it is. Yeah, it makes you feel good. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to keep working at it, though. What I've discovered over my many, many years of teaching is, while you never want to insult and be overly critical, where you're like, you're dumb, you're never going to be good at this, you should just drop the class, you're a failure, like that's obviously bad. But what I always noticed is the instant I started saying, hey, awesome job, this is great, they started plateauing. Didn't matter what it was, whether it was reading, writing, taking a certain test, whatever it was, they would immediately start tapering off their drive to improve. And so I don't hand out compliments very often, even with young students. I might say, hey, you're on the right track. Good job, but I think you can do even better. That kind of stuff that he referenced before. But handing out praise, while yes, it feels nice and the kid wants to hopefully keep doing it because they're getting some positive feedback, that doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes in the long term. It doesn't necessarily lead to reaching that potential that he's talking about. As he says, the experts want the criticism, and the criticism is what shapes you to want to keep honing your skills and keep getting better. And so, my students they know that I'm quite tough in the classroom. Why is that? Because I know you can do better. I know there's plenty of room for improvement here. Yes, I've been seeing you getting better. That's great. But there's still a lot of mistakes here we need to clean up, so let's keep working on that. I see, just like Bill Parcells, I see that you could get here. Right now, yeah, you were down here and you've improved to here, but there's still room to go, so let's keep going. So it's not just experts that need criticism. It's also maybe not beginners, but people who have been doing this a while. Like, I taught college, and so it's like, yeah, you've been writing papers for 10 years. You may not be an expert, but you're certainly not a beginner. You can handle some criticism. I can show you what you're doing wrong and what you need to get better at. So people who have at least some experience, we need to start criticizing because they need to be pushed harder. Because as I said, once they're complimented so much, they'll actually stop pushing themselves. They're like, oh, I guess I got my B+, so I'm good with that. I don't need to get any better. That's the mindset of most kids. Like, I'm good enough. I'm better than my friends, so I guess that's all I need to be. Whereas the teacher or the coach should come along and say, nope, yeah, I'm proud of you for getting up to that B+. You were at a C before and you've made your way up to a B+. That's great. But I think you could get an A on the next one. Let me show you how you could do that. It's going to take a lot of work. You're going to have to work really hard. It's going to take a lot of extra time and studying, but if you do it, I think you could reach that level. Well, now the kid has something to reach for if they want to do it. But yeah, too much praise makes people complacent. So we got to be careful of that. The final thing he said, though, is very important too. It depends on who's giving you the praise and the criticism. What I would often have, both at the lower levels and at the college level, I'd give a student a low grade on a paper. They'd get a D or something like that. And they'd come to my office like exasperated, like, I don't understand. My mom read this and she said it was great. Or my roommate read it and she said it was great. I don't understand how I got a D. It's like, yeah, they're not the best judge of what's good. I'm the expert at this. I'm the one who's been doing this for all these years. I'm the one who's read thousands of papers. I know what an A paper or a B+ paper look. This is a D paper. Trust me. Okay. But my mom was an English major. Nope, doesn't matter. I'm the expert here. I'm the one who's going to help you get better, but you got to listen and work with me and I'll help you. But yeah, so whom we listen to matters a lot. And a lot of young kids, they're seeking their feedback from people who don't really know what they're talking about. Now, there's a lot of teachers who don't know what they're talking about either. So that's why you've got to find the right teachers, the right mentors, the right coaches who truly have your best interest at heart and who are going to be honest with you. My job as a professor is not to inflate your ego. My job is not to tell you how special and great you are. It's to say, here's the potential I see in you. Let me show you what it takes to get to that potential. I'll guide you along the way, but you have to do it. If you want me to help you, I'll do that. If you don't, that's your choice. But I'm not going to tell you how great you are when you're here and I think you could be here. Let's work on this some more. And then it's up to them if they want to do it. So a variety of factors going on there with what Grant said.
Is there a line between this comfort with uncertainty and comfort with the idea of failing, of taking risk, of being a little bit more daring?
I think so. I think that the fear of failure stops a lot of people from growing, right? What happens is you don't want to embarrass yourself and you don't want to take a blow to your self-esteem. So you basically start to keep doing the things you're already good at. And over time, you become more and more concerned about making a mistake. You become increasingly perfectionistic. Your comfort zone gets smaller, and you don't benefit from trial and error. So one of the ways that I've tried to navigate this recently is I actually have a goal of having 3 things fail every year.
Okay. How have you got on this year?
I've only had 2 so far, so I need to step on the gas.
Yeah.
I don't set out trying to fail at anything. Let's be clear, right? I'm not like, all right, let me take on a project that is deliberately going to bomb. Rather, what I'm trying to do is set the expectation that if I don't have 3 projects fail, it means that I'm not aiming high enough and I'm not stretching myself far enough. And the upside of that then is that when something does crash and burn, I can say, okay, that checks off one of the failures for 2024 or 2025. And I think that, look, we're all gonna fail in a few things if we are pushing ourselves. And I think expecting that makes it a lot easier to stomach.
So his comments here about failure are really important, and this is something that when he says failure is a much better teacher than success, again, we don't necessarily want to just purposefully fail kids or treat them harshly or grade them harshly just to say, oh, you'll learn more if I'm tougher on you. It has to be done sort of strategically. And what I often do, I find this with my top students. And again, Grant is a smart guy, and he always wants to get better, and so that's why he said, I want to do things where I actually not purposefully fail, but I'm okay with failing at. Where I would often grade my top students slightly more tough than my other students. If things were coming too easily in the class, and maybe I didn't give them a grade that wasn't legitimate, but I'd be a little more picky on certain things, and so a student might get a 99 on their first paper, 98 or something, like it's a perfect paper, and I'm like, okay, this kid needs to be pushed a little harder, it's too easy. And so the next paper, I'm a little more rigorous on each element that I'm checking, and maybe even though for the rest of the class it would have gotten a 95, I might give that kid a 90 or an 89, which is an A minus or a B plus, to see how the kid reacts. And that's not going to affect his overall grade. I'm like, this kid's smart enough, he's going to get an A in the class. It's not going to ruin the kid's grade and harm his GPA like any of that stuff. But I want to poke a little bit and see how this kid responds. And those kinds of students almost always rebounded exactly how you want, which is, oh, they got ticked off that they got a 90, not ticked off like mad at me, like ticked off at themselves, like, oh, I know I can do better. And so the next time they're in my office, like 3 days prior, like, hey, can you go over this with me? Is there anything else I should improve? Is there anything else I need to work on? And, maybe next time it's like, okay, it's a little better. I give you a 92. And they're like, oh, I can still do better. And really how I would do it to make sure they knew I wasn't just being like unfair with them is I would say, at this level, you're doing great. But I said, but again, back to the potential thing, I think you could actually do this on the level of most professionals. If we're writing an article of some kind, like, here's how professionals do it. And see what you did here? It's a little bit weak from how we do it in the real world, those of us who are authors and professionals at this. So here's what I'd like you to work on for next time. And so they would take that as a challenge. And so it would stop becoming really about the grade. It would be a representation of, they could do better. But really I framed it as, hey, I'm going to grade you extra tough, and I want you to rise to the challenge. And they almost always would. No one ever got mad at me ever. None of those top students for being like, oh, you're treating me unfairly. They would always view it as a challenge. And that's what you want. I wouldn't necessarily do that with the lower students. I would grade them normally. And if they got a D, that's what they got, and then I would work with them the way I said just a minute ago, which is I would say, you're performing down here. I know you could be up here. I can help you, but you're going to have to put in the work. And then you see if they respond. But those top kids, they already know that they're pretty good. So how do you challenge them? Well, you make it even harder because they need to feel a little bit of, not failure, you're not giving them an F, but like an expectation they had that wasn't reached. They need to feel that because, as he just said, not reaching that expectation actually pushes you to want to reach it. So the idea of creating opportunities for maybe not catastrophic failures, but many failures along the way where they get a taste of being disappointed is actually really good. And this is why we're having so much trouble in the culture right now, is we've created a world that's so easy for young people, and grade inflation in the classroom or just completely lenient parenting at home has created a world where kids have no idea what failure is. They get good grades. Their parents let them do whatever they want. They have access to everything. They're never disappointed. And so when the slightest thing happens, someone says something mean online, or they get a low grade when they meet a teacher like me, or whatever the disappointing thing in life might be, they get dumped by their boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever. it like ruins them, and they go into depression, and they just feel awful for weeks on end, and we have this mental health crisis. It's like, yeah, you know why? Because these kids have no idea what disappointment is, because the world is so comfortable that they've never experienced anything difficult. So in the classroom, or on the sports field, or in the music classroom, or wherever you're training young people, we have to create opportunities for them to reach levels of success so they feel like they're improving. Remind them constantly, yeah, that's great that you're improving. You could keep doing more. I can see it. You're on the right path. Let's keep getting better. And then along the way, as they work up, they need to have little setbacks. So they go, well, you were on the right track. That's a slip up. Let's get back on the right track, so that they feel the disappointment and then learn how to respond to it. The response is, okay, I see I made a mistake. This teacher, this parent, this coach, this mentor is going to help me. So if I just listen and keep working on it, I can fix that mistake and get better for next time. That's what we want to instill in kids, is a lifelong maturity that develops, because along the way they've had successes, but also some failures. A little more success and improvement, little setback, more success. Oh, that went terribly wrong, but we'll work our way back up. Now it's just a tiny setback. Now we're on the right track again. That's how life always is. And so you've got to prepare kids for that. If everything is easy, if everyone gets a trophy, if everyone gets an A, everyone's a special student, like when life happens, they're not ready for it. So the idea of kind of putting yourself in situations where you could fail, while that might be a little tough for young people, it's easier for adults because you know how to handle it by then. But that's a good idea. And so that's what we need to do with all students, but especially your top students. Constantly put them in situations where things that they thought they were really good at, they actually start to struggle at, and light that fire of like, I'm gonna improve no matter what, kind of resilience in them, and they'll have really great results in the long term, which is what we want.
How debilitating is failure if we encounter it versus how we feel about it when fearing it in advance? I don't know if there's been any studies done on this, the fear of failure versus the sensation of failure, or the experience of failure.
Yeah, I think you've already anticipated where my favorite research on this goes. So this is Dan Gilbert and his colleagues, a group of psychologists. Gilbert and Wilson, I think, are two of the best. What they show is they study what's called affective forecasting, which is you make a prediction about how you're going to feel if something bad happens, and then you wait for some of those bad things to happen, and then you follow people and ask them, how do you actually feel? And most of us dramatically overestimate how much failure is going to sting, and also how long that sting is going to last. But empirically, failure is a better teacher on average than success. There's a Madsen and Desai study of the orbital launch industry that I think puts a point on this, where they basically study every organization that has ever launched a rocket into space over half a century. And what they want to know is, when do you make a leap forward in your success rate? And the answer is, it's after a really big fail. Because, and like a small failure, you can explain it away. You can move on really quickly. A big failure forces you, it stops you in your tracks to do the postmortem and to ask yourself, okay, what went wrong there? And how are we going to prevent that moving forward? And I think obviously we all need to do these when we flop. But I've become a big fan also of doing premortems, which Gary Klein has studied. So the idea of a premortem is you say, okay, we're about to make a big decision as a group, or, I've got a big choice in front of me. And let's assume in the next few years, with the benefit of hindsight, we conclude this was an unmitigated disaster. What are the most likely causes of that failure? When you have that conversation up front, or when you do that reflection up front, you get better at seeing around corners and anticipating what might go wrong. And then you can actually prevent it from happening in the first place.
His idea here about things not really mattering that much as you get older is very true. And it's something I tell my students too, because they might get panicky and nervous and anxious about an upcoming test or upcoming paper or whatever it is. And I constantly remind them, when you're 30, when you're 50, when you're whatever, when you're at some job someday, first of all, no one's ever going to ask you, hey, what grade did you get in your sophomore level history class? Like, no one cares, okay? So same thing with your essay in my English class. You might think by next week, if you get a bad grade, you're going to be miserable, but you probably won't be. And certainly 3 months from now, you won't even remember it. It just doesn't matter. So let's not focus so much on the grades. Let's focus on the improvement. Let's focus on strengthening our skills and our resilience, and not being so narrow-minded about, how many points is this worth and all the stuff that goes on in classrooms. Because again, in the long run, it just doesn't matter. So it's helpful to remind students because it might ease their tension a little bit, reduce some of their anxiety about, I'm not a very good writer, and so this paper is really stressing me out. I say it doesn't matter. The grade is the grade. Who cares? Okay. What I care about is are you learning from what I'm telling you in class? Are you putting in the time and effort to work on your skills? And then are you working on improving? Whatever grade you get, is the next one going to be better? Because that's what matters, is the improvement. And again, back to his idea of potential, there are some students who aren't A students. They're just not. Maybe their potential in English and writing is, they're going to be a C student. If they work really hard, they'll get up to a C. And so that's my job is, all right, you're awful at this. You're an F student. You have no idea how grammar and composition works. So we're going to work on getting you up to, a C level. Maybe that's your potential. And if we do that, great. Let's be happy with that because we were way worse and we've made our way up to something that's acceptable now. But if you're a C, if I think your potential is to be an A student, and all semester you're hovering around the C level because you're like, oh, whatever, I don't care about this. Well, you haven't done your job, and I haven't done my job as a teacher to push you hard enough to try to get you up to that A level, because it's the improvement that matters. Okay, ultimately it's not the grade, even though that's how we're measuring you. It's not. It's, do you reach your potential, and are you improving every step of the way? If you're the same person you were at the end of the semester as you were when you started, that's not good. You haven't utilized the class for what it's supposed to be. Maybe you're just chasing a grade. Maybe you're just trying to slide by because you don't care about that subject area. Whatever it is, you have potential to be better. Let's work on that, regardless of what the grade ends up being. The idea of the pre-mortem is something I do in my classes as well, where I will say, okay, let's travel a week into the future, and you've already handed your essay in, and I've graded it, and I've handed it back, and you get a grade that's 2 grades lower than you thought you were going to get. Your expectations were not met at all. What do you think will have gone wrong to have those lowered results? Where did you go wrong? What were the errors that you potentially could make on your paper that would take you, if you thought you were going to get a B, probably if you were hoping for a B and you ended up getting a D, well, let's guess, what do you think might go wrong to land you at a D level when you thought when you really want a B? And we go through that. We make a list and we say, okay, I probably didn't go meet with the tutor this week. And so then I missed stuff in the editing process, and that's what probably dropped my grade. I didn't follow instructions that the professor wrote out and said, here's what I want in the first paragraph. Here's what I want in the second paragraph. I probably got the order of my argument wrong. And so that's probably why you deduct me points and why my grade dropped. We make a list of all the things that would cause you to go from the grade you want to the grade you get that's lower. And then we start addressing those. And so we start making a plan. Okay, well, in the next week, here's what you need to be working on to make sure that bad result doesn't happen. And so that pre-mortem idea is great. It's very useful in a classroom. I've done it for years. And it can apply to any class, but it's really especially useful for writing because there's so many different skills that need to be incorporated in writing a paper that, again, you can kind of make a list and check those off as you prepare to write that final draft. So use the pre-mortem in your writing classes for sure.
Yeah, you had a tweet the other day where you were talking about how people think that you save time by shortening down words, but the subtext of what it actually tells people is that you just didn't care about them enough to write something out more verbatim.
People are evaluating you all the time. Don't you want to know what they're thinking? And don't you want them to help you grow?
You're evaluating yourself all the time, and you're also evaluating what you think other people are evaluating you on all the time. I wonder, I bet that he thinks that I did well or badly in that thing. It's like, put a score on it, ask them, and they can tell you. Yeah, another great prompt for giving a presentation or a talk or whatever, and asking people for feedback, because again, the desirability for people to not hurt your feelings sort of holds strong typically, is if you had to cut 20% from this talk, Just tell me, what would you get rid of? What would be top of the list? What would be because for the most part, your good stuff's probably going to be good, but it's the really weak stuff that needs to go first. That's what should be triaged to be thrown out.
Oh, I love that you pointed this out, Chris. It reminds me of Letty Klotz and Gabrielle Adams' research, where they show that when you ask people how to change, like how can I improve? How can our team improve? What most people do is they add. They give you more things to do. And they forget that our plates are already pretty full. And one of the best ways to improve something is to cut away what's not working, to subtract. And this sort of addition bias or addiction to always adding things, it doesn't help us as often as it seems like it would. And so I love your prompt to say, okay, if you were going to cut 20%, like what is the fat that could be trimmed in this presentation? And that creates room then for the gems to actually be polished.
Again, several really good things here, especially for the English classroom. Chris very quickly talked about feedback. That's what he was referring to. And there's some debate in education, and especially in English, because there's so much writing and feedback given. It's hard to give feedback on a test when it's like, well, the answer was A, not C. But in writing, you can give a lot of feedback. And there's sort of a movement among teachers that believes that you want to give only a couple pieces of feedback. Like focus on 3 things, and if it's too much, the students won't understand it all, and they won't be able to incorporate it all. And if they see that many red marks, they're just going to get freaked out, and they're going to hate your class even more and all that stuff. There's some validity to that, which is why my rubric that I invented has 3 main domains. So there is always let's focus on 3 things. Okay. Now within those 3 things, there's a number of other details that need to be covered as well. But the general idea for students, because I want to keep it fairly simple, is if we do these 3 things correctly, you should be okay. You're not going to go too far wrong if you do those 3 things correctly. But I completely disagree with give minimal feedback because otherwise it's too overwhelming. I give extremely thorough feedback. I mark everything. I mark every single comma. I mark every single fragment and run on. I put notes in the margins of whether it's structural notes or argumentative notes, that their logic doesn't make sense, or why are you telling me this? But you already said this up here. Like I have marks everywhere. And again, teachers might say, well, that's too overwhelming. The students won't even know what to focus on. The problem on the other side, though, is if you have too few marks, how do you grade that student? If a student looks at their paper and there's only a couple marks on it, but you knew that was a really bad paper and they see a D at the top, the student automatically goes, why did I get a D? There's hardly any marks on this paper. I don't understand. So now they're confused. Whereas when they look at my papers and there's marks everywhere and they get a D, they're like, oh, I can see why I got a D. I may not like it. I may not even agree with his notes, but he clearly found a bunch of problems here and that's why he gave me a D. At least that makes sense to the kid. But you're just confusing a student when you don't provide thorough feedback, but then you have to grade honestly and you give the kid a low score. The student's now more confused than ever. Also, a kid might look at a paper and maybe the kid got a B or something, it's a decent score and there's only a couple marks on it. That kid might go, wow, I only had a couple problems. I'll just keep doing that because I got me a B. That's really what I was aiming at. So, that's that plateau part. Like, oh, I got a grade that I'm happy with. The teacher didn't really have many things to say, so I guess I'm doing fine. I'll just keep doing that. It's like, no, the goal is improvement. So I never want the student to be satisfied with what they got. I always want better and, again, more resilience and improvement of skills. So I mark everything so that, yeah, the student may not improve in all of those areas on the next paper because it might be overwhelming, but the student might go, okay, I see a lot of, subject-verb agreement problems here. I need to knock all those off because if I take care of all those marks, even if I spend all my time and I don't even get to the other marks, that should at least improve my grade quite a bit. And usually it will. So there are a variety of strategies to grading, but the idea of saying, well, you want to keep your grading and marking limited because too much feedback is overwhelming. I completely disagree with that. You should give kids as much feedback as you possibly can. Now, there is a hack to that I figured out as well because I teach, I teach many, many classes and we write many papers. One thing you can do for a shortcut is I will give students a rubric grade. So, I have the rubric, I mark the boxes, and I'm like, that adds up to an 85 or whatever. And I'll just give that. So it's just the sheet of the rubric and the number at the top. And I'll always put a note on every student's paper. If you'd like a thorough review of this paper with all my feedback notes, stop by my office for a 20-minute conference and I'll go over it with you. And that is a test. First of all, it's a shortcut for me because then it saves me hours and hours of time. When you're grading 100 papers at a time, every couple weeks, every 2 weeks or whatever, it's endless grading. So what you can do is you can shortcut it, and then you give the feedback in a one-on-one format, and that's when I go over, I bring them into my office, I have to sit at the computer, and I type out all of the comments that I would have done if I were doing it just by myself, and I walk through them with the student, and I say, okay, I'm going to mark this here because as you can see, here's where you have a fragment. I'm going to mark fragments so you remember it. And they see me go through it line by line, and by the end, there's marks all over it, but now they know here's what you could have done better. What it also does is it shows me who are the students who actually want to learn, because I'm not going to waste my time on students that don't want to learn. And I can do that at the college level because they're choosing to be there. So that's a hack for you teachers out there, that you don't have to grade so much, and you're going to find out who your students are who genuinely want to learn, and those are the ones you focus on. Everyone else, you're like, look, I'm still going to teach you in class, but you're going to have to deal with this on your own because I tried to offer you help. I invited you to my office for a conference. You ignored me. So guess what? I'm not going to help you anymore. Or I'm not going to give you extra help, I should say. I'll help you as much as I help everyone else, but I'm not going to give you the extra. And almost always, it's the top students who come in. And so I get kids who come into my office like, I'd like to see how I can improve. And I go, what grade did I give you? A 97. Like, you're doing fine. Get out of here. You're great. Or that's when I'll go over and, like I said before, I'll go over it and I'll say, you know what? One way that you can start performing more like a professional, like this is what real experts do. This is what those of us who do this for a living do. And that, again, that intrigues them. And they're like, oh, I'd like to kind of get to an expert level. And so those are the kids, again, they don't need it. They don't need the advice. They're already acing my class. And yet you find out, oh, those are the kids that care. That's who I'm going to help. And they become superstars. They're great. Interesting thing he mentions here about improvement. A lot of improvement, this applies specifically to English classes, a lot of improvement is actually editing. As he said, many times when people are preparing presentations or other projects, they think, oh, if I want to get better, I need to keep adding more stuff. And those of us who do research for a living can feel that way a lot. I'm kind of dealing with that right now, where I feel like, oh, do I need more research? Should I add an extra chapter to this book I'm writing? Should I keep making this longer? And what happens in English class is the best writers, this is why in my process, if you go and look at my teaching boot camp, I explain all this. We always write way more than we are going to end up turning in. I want students to get in the habit of realizing that the way you make something better, especially in writing, is usually, maybe not always, but usually trimming things out, making it more concise, making it clearer, making it more focused. Instead of rambling on to 3 different topics, how about you just dive deeply into that topic? And that's your assignment. What I'll often do is I'll say, okay, you have a paper due, next month. It's 1,500 words. Your draft is due on this date, 1,500 words. We're going to start going over it. And what then I'll do once they've turned in 1,500 words, I'll say, okay, our job now in the next week or 2, or whenever the final draft is due, is to trim this down to 1,000 words or 1,200 words. And they'll say, what? I did all that writing for nothing? It's like, no, most of that is going to be fluff and it's extra. I want us to trim back so that we just have the really good, sharp material left, and their papers get way better. So a lot of times students are trying to expand into the word count. So if you say, make your paper 1,000 words, they get to 800 and then they start using the filler words and they're rambling and all that stuff. I do the opposite. I say, and I don't tell them that I'm tricking them, but I say, I want this paper to be 1,500 words. And then we trim it back. And they're like, you made us do extra work. Yeah, I did. But now your paper is going to be better for it because the editing is really the most important part of this drafting process. So that can happen in a variety of areas of your life. Condensing down, trying to make things clearer and simpler is usually the better option.
What do you think about the role of emotions and how people can treat them with the respect but objectivity that they probably need to?
I think that's got to be balanced. So that's one option for emotion regulation is like, okay, when you're feeling anxiety, it's a sign that you care about something that is beyond your control. And let's talk about then what the things are that you can control. And so you then went to preparation. And so like you are potentially a defensive pessimist, somebody who worries about the worst case scenario and then like, harnesses that anxiety as motivation to prepare. Which is why I think we have to remember, like, we don't want you to be in a great mood for the next week and a half before you get on stage, because that might actually quell your anxiety prematurely, and then you get complacent and you don't do the preparation necessary, and then you're more likely to to disappoint yourself or others. And then I think the last thing here is like let's get some psychological distance and ask yourself, okay, you've been in this situation before. What is the base rate of failure? It's actually pretty low. That means you're fairly good at this, and you're also mostly prepared. And so that's a reason to be confident that you're capable of controlling enough to have a high probability of success. So I guess those are the range of emotion regulation strategies I would try here.
So dealing with students' emotions, I mean, this applies to everybody, but especially kids who are, again, not mature enough to handle the difficulties of the world quite yet, and they get nervous about a lot of things. One thing I often talk to my students about is if you're, as he said, if you're feeling nervous, one, it's a sign you care about it. So that's good. If some big project is coming up or some big performance or recital or big game or whatever the kid is involved in, and they're not really nervous about it, could be that you just have a really cool customer on your hands, that they just don't get frazzled by things. But it also could be that the student just doesn't really care. They're not really into it. They're just like, whatever, I have this baseball game tonight, but who cares? The fact that you're a little bit stressed or nervous about how it's going to go means you care about it. There is some value in that. So that's something I often tell students is, look, if you're stressed about this paper coming up or this big math test or whatever it is, it's not something to be necessarily worried about. It's something that you should realize is a positive. That stress can be good. It signifies that it's important to you. So that means you're on the right track. You're doing something valuable in your life and that you want to be at least somewhat successful at it. So let's embrace that and not run away from it and think, oh, I'm so anxious, I'm nervous and scared. The stress is good. And one thing you can do, a little psychological trick, is because anxiety and fear are actually very closely related in your brain to excitement, the same kind of chemicals are working in your brain. What you can do is, if you're feeling a little nervous, instead smile. And instead of saying, oh, I'm so scared and I'm anxious about this thing I'm about to do, smile. Your brain will immediately start feeling positive emotions and say, I'm excited. I can't wait to get out there. Even if you're sort of lying to yourself and you're scared to death to go on that stage or on the field or sit down for the SATs or whatever big thing you've got coming up, instead of kind of closing in and being scared, change it in your mind, because again, the emotions are actually quite similar, and turn it into a positive, and you'll immediately start feeling better and your nerves will start to subside at least a little bit. And that's very helpful. So I do this with my athletes when there's a big game and they're a little nervous, first game of the year, or we're playing in a certain venue that's really, really important. And I can tell they're a little bit nervous about it. We're playing a really tough opponent. They're scared to play them. I say, let's everybody smile. Let's stand up. Let's get some nervous energy out, and let's all say, I'm excited. And that kind of it lightens the mood a little bit and eases the tension. And then they start feeling like, okay, yeah, let's get out there. Let's do this thing. So the same thing can happen in a classroom. When you can tell students are stressed, put a smile on their face, make them smile, say, I'm excited, let's get after it. And their mood will change, and they usually do a lot better because that tension starts to decrease. Something else that happens that they mentioned briefly is this idea of fear. Something I talk to my students a lot about is oftentimes they say, well, I want a good grade in this class. I'm really afraid of failing and getting a low score. And I say, I don't think that's the truth. Many times, students don't have a fear of failure. They actually have a fear of success, which might sound weird because you think, why would anyone be afraid of success? Success is what we all want. Isn't that what we're all chasing? Except when you think of what success means and what it requires, that is what students are often afraid of. Because think about it. What does it mean to get an A on a paper, especially if you're not naturally very good at writing? What does it mean? Well, you probably had to put a lot of time and effort into doing it. You had to do a ton of research. You had to write several drafts. Maybe you had to go meet with a tutor. Maybe you came into the teacher's office to get extra help. You had to put in a lot of work. And so it's way easier to just not do all that and then tell yourself, oh, I'm afraid of getting a bad grade. And then when you get a D, you go, see, I knew it. I was afraid of this. I'm not very good at this writing thing. I'm not very good at English. School's not for me. It's a lot easier to just start making excuses for yourself instead of saying, you know what, success requires this much effort and energy. If I'm going to do that, here's what I have to do. And I'm not going to be afraid of tackling those incremental steps, those tutoring visits, the chats with the teacher, the various drafting, all the time in the library doing research, whatever it is. I'm not going to be scared of those things because if this is my goal and I want to do it, that's what I'm going to do. And once you've done it, because then if you get that A, guess what? The teacher expects you to do it every time now because guess what? You showed me you could do it. So let's do that all the time. And that's what students are actually afraid of. They're afraid of, well, if I do all that and I'm successful, then everyone's going to expect it of me. And then I can't get a low score after that because they'll know I was just a fraud. And it's like, yeah, that's the consequence. You either do it or you don't. So don't be afraid of failing. That's probably not what's happening. You're probably more afraid of being successful because being successful requires a lot of extra work. And that's probably what you're afraid of. You're not afraid of the failing. You're afraid of the work. So we got to change our mindset. And that's something I tell students about all the time. It's not the grade. It's not the low score. It's not the failing. It's that I think you're nervous about what it takes to be good. So let's embrace that.
Yeah, again, it comes back to that desire for control, that if you're trying to do something that you've run 50,000 times before and it goes wrong, well, it shouldn't have gone wrong. So there's no acceptable play baked into the system. There's no tolerance for things to be a little bit more unpredictable. But if you do it and you say, well, look, part of this, that was the entire point of it. The entire point of it was to find a little bit more playfulness. I love that data that you talked about. You said we feel worse when our negative expectations are confirmed than when our positive expectations bring disappointment. A recipe for happiness is planning for the worst while continuing to hope for the best. I think that's a lovely juxtaposition.
I think it's something that we forget. So I'll give you another favorite equation from my favorite blogger. This is Tim Urban, who writes that happiness is reality minus expectations.
Yep.
I think that might be the single greatest line in the history of Wait, But Why? Like happiness is reality minus expectations. And what that drives home for all of us, and it's supported by a lot of research in psychology, is that if you are disappointed, it means that you are expecting too much. But wait, you don't want to lower your expectations. So you have a paradox here. Like, on the one hand, to be successful, you have to aim really high. On the other hand, to be satisfied, you have to temper your expectations. Well, guess what? The only solution I know of to that paradox is to have two targets instead of one. You have an aspiration, which is extremely high. It's the best case scenario that you're hoping for and shooting for. You also have a minimum acceptable outcome, which is if I clear this standard, I will feel like it is good enough. And that creates for you this range in which, like, if I'm between my minimum acceptable and my aspirational, I can be happy. And most of us don't do that, right? We either set the acceptable target and then I'm satisfied, but I'm not growing that much and I'm not excelling. Or we set the ambitious goal. We don't have the acceptable result and then we're successful and miserable.
So the first part of what they're discussing here is really valuable, again, in an English classroom. This is where drafting comes in a writing assignment. What I encourage students to do is to try things out. I don't want to hear the same tired formulaic thinking on paper. I want students to try an argument, try something you've never done before, try out, a stylistic choice maybe you've never done before. And if it doesn't work, I'll tell you, or your classmates will tell you or something. But let's experiment with it. Let's make it a little bit playful. It's too often students think the drafting process is, well, this is how, I want it to reflect what my final outcome is going to be. And really good drafting, again, has several sequences to it. There's multiple stages. It's never like, turn in a rough draft. Tomorrow, your final paper's due. No. Start with some, the brainstorming stage is really like, get all of your ideas out. Let's do something unique here. Yeah, you can, like you said, 80-20 or whatever, do some stuff that you normally do on your papers through 80% of the paper. let's try 20% new stuff, a completely new angle on this topic or this argument. Again, a stylistic choice. That's where you can have a little fun and you can encourage students like, hey, this isn't being graded. This isn't your final. So let's just try a bunch of things and one of them might work and it might be really cool, but we're not going to know if you don't try it. So let's just experiment. And then through the process, you can say, yeah, that doesn't really work. That makes it more confusing, or this argument just doesn't work. It's not logical. And you can, again, go back to what we said before. You can weed out the stuff that doesn't work, but you should always be trying new things. And especially the top students. Lower level students, they might need more repetition on the basics, but especially your top students. I always challenge my top students, like, be as weird as you want, be as controversial as you want, say whatever you think you want to say. Make it interesting, make it powerful. And if it doesn't work, I'll tell you, and we'll try something else. That's fine. We've got plenty of time to work on this draft. And when they realize they have a little bit of that freedom to just experiment, they enjoy the process more because they know it's not like a life or death situation that, well, I have to get this right on the first try. That's my whole grade's dependent on. Like, nope, we're going to work through this process over the course of a couple weeks. And, we'll throw some stuff against the wall. If it sticks, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something else. It's fine. There's, it reduces the pressure and gives students a lot more, again, just confidence that it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be something that's quite literally a work in progress. You're always changing stuff until the very last minute, and that's totally fine. The idea here of happiness is something that all students face because they all want to get good grades. They all want to feel good about their learning and feel like they're performing well, or at least on paper look like they're performing well. And that's something I really try to cut out of my college students thinking immediately. It's like, it's not about your happiness. Okay. You talk about happiness is reality minus expectations. My job is not to provide you happiness. My job is to provide you the reality part. So again, when students think, well, I got an A in English in high school, and now how come I'm getting a D in this class? It's like, well, I'm the reality wake up check. That's my job. You're not as good at this as you think you are. I can help you. You have the potential. We can work on this together. But right now, here's where you are. I know your expectations are here. And so the in-between, this is the misery index, the decrease of happiness. But I need you to face reality, because if we're living in this world up here and it's not the truth, then I'm doing you a disservice. If I'm giving you inflated grades, for example, to try to meet your expectations. Well, I don't want my student mad at me, so I'm going to be nice and give the kid a B+ when that's not what he deserved. I'm just making you happy and meeting your expectations, but it's not real. The reality is down here. My job as the teacher is to bring you to reality so that we can deal with it. This is why, again, the grades aren't as important. Again, we need a measurement. We need a scale of how you're doing. But I constantly tell my students, the grades aren't the goal. The improvement is the goal, and the pursuit of potential is the goal. So I want your expectations for how hard you're going to try and your level of pursuit of improvement to be up here. And if you do that, then I will grade you accordingly. But if you think you should get a certain grade but you don't deserve it, well, you're going to be miserable. You're going to hate me. You're going to go badmouth me to all your friends and say, don't take his class and all that. And that's not the reality. The reality is I need to be honest with you about where you're at so that we can figure out how to improve. And that is where you'll start feeling maybe not happiness, but at least some improved sense of accomplishment and confidence that, oh, you know what? This isn't the grade I really wanted, but I'm way better in this thing called writing or reading or whatever the skill is than I was 8 weeks ago. And that's the biggest compliment that I always get from students. Doesn't always happen very soon, but could be at the end of the semester, could be at the end of 2 years. Often it's after graduation. I'll get a note from a kid, or a kid will come meet me in my office and say, you know what? I really struggled in your class because you gave me grades that I thought were too low, but you showed me how to improve. And by the end, I worked myself up to a B or a C or whatever. And again, I know that's not great, but I realize I'm way smarter now than I was before. And I appreciate you pushing me and telling me the truth on what I needed to work on. It's amazing how many of those letters and conversations I've had over my many years. And it's like, yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you realized, you had an awakening, an epiphany that, oh, that was what that class was for. Yeah, that guy was tough on me in the moment, those weeks when I kept getting C's on my papers, but I definitely improved. It helped me in all my other classes. I've gotten a job because of the stuff you told me and forced me to work on. I actually used that in a job interview, and that's why they liked me. I've heard all of these things over the years, and that's what gives teachers joy. But again, the joy isn't in the giving everyone the happiness. The joy isn't in, well, the kid, if he doesn't get an A, he's going to go complain to his mom and the principal or the dean or whoever, or his coach, because he needs to stay eligible, is going to be mad at me. Like, that's not what matters. Our job as teachers is to give the kids reality. Being fair, we're not punishing them, but we're giving them the truth. You are not an A student. You're a D student. Let's start with the honesty and we'll work up from there. And that will be the satisfaction you get from the improvement will be worth it. I promise you. And that's what I'm constantly telling students. And sometimes they still hate me afterwards, but many times once they realize what my goal is and what my job is all about in being honest with them and helping them, again, try to reach that potential that right now you're not at that potential, but I'll help you. That's my job. We'll work on it together. And they can be appreciative in the long run.
Yeah, I realized that you wrote something much more beautiful than I'd done, but on the same topic, about how the hallmark of expertise is not how much you know, it's how well you synthesize.
I think our ability to set boundaries on what we consume, right? I think to raise our attentional filters and block out information that is actually redundant or overwhelming or poor quality, that is a vital skill. I think that like filtering out is actually in some ways more important than taking in, right? So my colleague Dan Leventhal writes a lot about absorptive capacity, which is a person or an organization's capability to take in new information. And I think we're all now drowning in information, and I want to know how finely tuned is your filter to know what to ignore and what to avoid. There's actually now a body of research on what's called critical ignoring, which is, do you have the discernment, like you're talking about, to know what to immediately not pay attention to or discount or dismiss? And we have to do that faster and faster now as we're bombarded with more information. And then I think the other skill here, just to build on the synthesis point, Dan Pink wrote about this. I think his most prescient book was A Whole New Mind, which is now 2 decades ago, where he argued that like in a left brain world, right brainers were actually going to dominate the future. And he named a particular right brain skill that I think now there's a premium on, which he called symphony. And it's the ability to take a bunch of different musical notes and arrange them into a harmony or a melody and a pleasing. I shouldn't even do this metaphor because I'm completely clueless about music, but that idea of symphony is something now that gets rewarded in a big way, right? Can you not only cut through all the noise, but then zoom in on what's really important and connect those dots in a way that other people can understand? And I think that maybe this is just a variation on your scavenger forager analogy, but I think that it used to be the dot collectors who were rewarded. Like the more stuff you knew, the more impressive you were, and people saw that as a mark of expertise. And now it's the dot connectors who are going to rule the world because they can spot the patterns that are invisible to others and then anticipate those. And I think that means like you have to see the problems in order to solve them, and in order to see the problems in a complex world, you have to connect dots and synthesize.
So in this last clip, Grant says something that I've explained to students for many years as well, that this is what being part of an education system, and especially at the college level, a liberal arts education, really is supposed to do, in my opinion. It's to help students synthesize all of the potential, pieces that are out there and try to connect some of the dots and put them into a pattern that can be used and implemented. And so what seems to be happening, and has been for a while, is we're really just training students to be part of the machine. It's like, pick the one thing that you like or you want to study or whatever makes the most money. It's something. Go into coding. It's like, just be a coder. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can do that and you can be very successful at that. But that's not exactly the point of education. The point of education is to take these ideas from technology and from history and from literature and from math and from, some of the biology or something like that, and like combine some of those into new and interesting ideas that can be helpful to people out in the real world, whether they're a career or not. It's the ability to pull from a variety of places. And again, that's what the broad K through 12 education should be doing, and that's what a liberal arts education at the university level should be doing. It's in my classes, I constantly refer, even though I taught English, to all the other subject areas that they would have been studying, because I wanted them to see the patterns of how this relates to this and that relates to that. And if you can combine those things, you can make an argument about this. And it makes the education so much more interesting, because then it's not like, oh, I have to go to English, and so all I think about in English class is English. That's not always the most fun for people, especially if they have a lot of other interests. And so I was constantly pulling from these other fields of school or of their extracurricular life or whatever, to make the patterns and make the connections. This thing we're talking about in this novel, that's the same thing that happens over here, that happened in history. Or, these things that we feel from a psychological perspective, that's what happens in this story. It's all related, and we're really moving away from that, especially as college becomes just career and job training. And that's not good, because I believe that's it's a practical education for again, job training, but it's not what I think it means to be a truly educated human being. And so I did a piece a couple weeks ago about Ian McGilchrist and his book on the two hemispheres of the brain, and it's exactly the same as what Grant just said there from author Daniel Pink, that the world actually needs more people who can identify the patterns and connect things. The 20th century, or at least the back half of the 20th century, has really been about know one thing and know it really well, and that's the way the world goes. And with as complex as the world is getting, you're going to get left behind, actually, if all you can think about and understand is one thing. That's kind of the left hemisphere of the brain is very good at focusing on one thing and just repeating it. It's good at replicating. The right half, again, go back to my podcast if you want to listen to that, is about pulling from a variety of places and seeing the bigger picture. And our world is just becoming increasingly narrowed. And that's tough, because there's so much out there, as they were just saying. Like, there's an infinite now amount of information that if all you think about is one thing, you're going to get overwhelmed with endless amounts of it. And so you've got to be able to sift through that better and see which is useful and applicable in a broader context, and then see how it relates to other things, and then synthesize those things together. And that's how we come up with new and creative ideas. So that's why, my book the books that I write are about economics and literature. That's why I have a course on here on my English Champion website about Shakespeare and biology, about technology and religion. Like, I'm constantly synthesizing ideas, because it's way more interesting and it's way more useful than just siloing all of our academics or even our broader cultural life into these domains where you just do one thing at a time. I believe the smartest people are the ones, as they said, are the ones who can synthesize and bring different worlds together and create new and interesting things. So a lot of English stuff there, but also some broader education ideas as well. Hope you enjoyed some of those clips from Adam Grant on the Modern Wisdom podcast. Hopefully you found my synthesis with the classroom useful, because we're all trying to help kids. We're all trying to help students get better. We're trying to help other teachers get better. And, we need to pull from a variety of areas to do that. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned about psychology and human behavior that can influence what goes on in the classroom. And hopefully everyone can get smarter from learning those things. So thanks for listening. Stay tuned to English Champion for more in the upcoming weeks. I'll see you next time.